We're talking about growing money from property and not trees. As Sandra said, my name is Barry Watkins from Clever Finance Solutions. What I do is help people find the right loan products for their immediate and long-term needs and goals. But we also act as mentors for people who are investing in property. And that may be by sharing what other clients are doing, sharing experiences that we've had ourselves, other clients have had, any of those sorts of things that will help people reach their own goals. I sound like I'm getting louder. Okay. So, we'll start off with just looking at why people invest and I guess stages of their life. So we all go through a stage of life. You start off in you might go to uni, you might start off working in a job, whatever it may be. You're in your 20s, perhaps your early 30s, you've got a high disposable income, you've got a good job. And then most people then tend to go to their next stage of life where they start a family, have children, have more expenses, so their disposable income decreases down. Then they go to the next stage of life where their kids move out of home. Disposable income goes up again because they don't have the expenses of their family anymore. They then traditionally is when most people then start ploughing money into super or investing it for their retirement. Because obviously the last stage you get to then is your retirement, where you only have the income that you've got, whether it be from your super, your investments or your pension, is what you've got to live off for the next X amount of years, depending on when you retire and how long you think you're going to live for. Most of the commentators and analysts out there at the moment, we have our 9% super. They're sort of saying, well, 9% super is not enough. Realistically, we should be doing 15% super to get a good level of super for a retirement income when you want to retire. Now, I don't know too many people who put in 15% of income. Most of it's 9% and that's it, and then the rest of it is spent on everyday needs as they do. So most people during their lifetime will then think about, okay, well perhaps I should invest. And investing, traditionally they either look at shares, super, or some people for an investing might be starting and running their own business and watching that grow, and then at the end of that selling that off, and that's their retirement income. So they're the main three ways that people tend to invest, and we're looking at property mainly because property is a relatively stable investment. As you've probably seen from the global financial crisis, the share market had a great fall, 40 to 50% fall from its peaks of late last year to sort of March, April this year. Property, most of the property, depending on where you were, some of the more not speculative, but beach houses and things, holiday homes, tended to dip off a bit. Even the lower property tended to dip off a bit, or flatten off, didn't really grow much, but it didn't really have the great falls like the share market did, or like property in the US did. Property here tended to hold up fairly well and stay at a reasonable level, and most people kept on doing property transactions, whether it be buying for investment or buying for themselves. And I guess that's because everybody needs to live somewhere, whether they're going to rent somewhere or whether they're going to buy somewhere to live. We all need to have a roof over our head of some sort, so that's what they tend to look for. Just as a show of hands, how many people in the audience are buying a property, own a property, or partly own it with the bank? Well, that's a good percentage. So most people tend to be into property in some way, and I think the statistics are about 27% of the population rent. Most other people are either buying or already own their property. Over the longer terms also with property, the returns have exceeded inflation. The latest information out from the AMP chief economist was over an 80-year term, which he looked at, which came out in August 2009. Over the 80-year term, property had done 11% per annum as a return. So it's way exceeding inflation, when inflation has been around the 4% as a long-term figure. Property also gives you the ability to be very active, so you could be a developer. out there buying blocks of land, building units or skyscrapers or houses, whatever on it. Or you can be not so active. You can be just go out, buy a house, buy a unit, find a tenant, have a property manager run it all, and you need to do very little. They'll basically look after it all, they'll find new tenants, they do the inspections, you just have to get the income from it, pay the bank. It's a fairly passive thing that you can do. I guess the next part is understanding the property market. Most people, I mean, when I mention the 11% per annum growth, it's not a nice straight 11% per annum. It doesn't start from here and just sort of go nicely up like this. It tends to have curves. So you tend to have peaks of the property prices, then it will dip down a bit or stay flat, then it will have another peak as it comes back up. And same trend, and those trends tend to be about 7 to 10 years between those peaks and troughs, or sorry, between the peaks is about 7 to 10 years, and that's averaged pretty well over the last 80 years. It's pretty well done that. It tends to have its peaks and troughs. And rental income tends to follow the same sort of peaks and troughs, not at the same time. Rental income tends to peak earlier, and then those who are renting tend to think, well, hey, I can buy something and pay less than I'm paying in rent. So then they tend to go out and buy, and that then drives up property prices, and therefore you have the peaks and troughs that occur. The other part to consider, of course, is that it's not in every state at the same time. So, I mean, in Sydney, 2003 was the peak that we had, and then it tended to dip or flatten off after that, whereas somewhere like Perth, their peak was more like 2006. Brisbane was still peaking right up until the end of until the GFC sort of came along last year. They were still having quite good price increases throughout 2008, as it was, yes, 2008. Yeah, so they were still going quite well through that period.